Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: U.S. Supreme Court rebuffs lawyers punished after woeful suit backing Trump. Southern Republicans look to nationalize 2023 governor's races by invoking Biden. Ukraine plays down U.S. funding snag. How a £25 payment is turning Scotland into a European pioneer in reducing child deprivation. Kremlin sees U.S. budget setback for Ukraine as harbinger of Western war fatigue. U.S. Supreme Court rebuffs lawyers punished after woeful suit backing Trump. The Globe and Mail. The U.S. Supreme Court has refused to hear an appeal from two lawyers who were sanctioned $187,000 by a judge after they brought a lawsuit challenging the result of the 2020 U.S. presidential election. The lawyers had accused voting equipment company Dominion Voting Systems, Facebook, and a nonprofit organization of stealing the election from Donald Trump. The judge ordered them to pay the legal fees of the parties they sued and impose the financial sanction. The Supreme Court's decision means the sanction will stand. Southern Republicans look to nationalize 2023 governor's races by invoking Biden. The Toronto Star. Republican candidates for governor in Kentucky and Mississippi are using President Joe Biden as a key part of their campaigns, despite the fact that he is not on the ballot. In both states, GOP nominees are just as likely to talk about Biden as they are their actual opponents in the general election. The strategy reflects the deepening ideological divides in the U.S. and is a way for candidates to create a mental shortcut for identifying individuals as U.S. or them, said Carrie Archie Russell, an expert on Southern politics at Vanderbilt University. The campaigns in Kentucky and Mississippi could serve as a test for messaging in the 2024 presidential election year, when Biden is expected to run for re-election. Ukraine plays down U.S. funding snag. Wall Street Journal. Ukraine is seeking to reassure the U.S. that its support for the country in its conflict with Russia has not faltered, despite doubts about fresh funding. A short-term spending bill signed by President Joe Biden averted a government shutdown, but did not include $6 billion of aid for Ukraine, leading to concerns about future U.S. support. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said discussions with Republicans and Democrats were ongoing to ensure support continued. The omission has prompted concerns about Washington's leadership role and uncertainty about the future of U.S. backing for Ukraine. How a £25 payment is turning Scotland into a European pioneer in reducing child deprivation. Financial Times. The Scottish Child Payment, a weekly cash payment of £25 for each child under 16 years old, has been praised for reducing child poverty rates in Scotland, and has the potential to be a model for cash disbursements in combating poverty globally. The payment has helped lift about 90,000 children out of poverty in Scotland this year, and a total of 316,000 children have benefited from the scheme. It is paid in addition to other welfare benefits received by families with children under 16 years old, meaning a four-child family is entitled to £5,200 a year that is not available to peers in England. The child payment was introduced at £10 per child per week in 2021, and raised to £25 in November 2022. Supporters of Scottish independence believe the success of the payment demonstrates how the country could do things differently if it broke with the UK. However, some campaigners and charities argue that more needs to be done to meet poverty reduction pledges, such as providing free breakfasts to all primary school children. Kremlin sees U.S. budget setback for Ukraine as harbinger of Western war fatigue. Reuters. The Kremlin has described the U.S. Congress's decision to pass a stopgap funding bill that excluded aid for Ukraine as a temporary setback for Kyiv. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that while he believed the setback was temporary, and that the U.S. would continue its involvement in the conflict, he also forecasted that war fatigue in the West would grow and lead to a split in opinion. Peskov's comments came after the party of Robert Fico won an election in Slovakia, pledging to end military aid to Ukraine. The Kremlin has long predicted that Western support for Ukraine would wane. U.S. shale bosses vow to hold back drilling despite rising oil price. Financial Times. American shale drillers have said they will not increase production even if oil prices reach $100 a barrel, citing the need for capital discipline and claiming the Biden administration is waging a war on fossil fuels. The price of Brent crude has risen by over 25% to $95 a barrel since June, complicating the U.S. Federal Reserve's efforts to curb inflation and presenting a political challenge to President Joe Biden. Despite the price increase, there are few signs that the industry plans to invest the profits into new exploration or production. The legal troubles of former U.S. President Donald Trump. Reuters. Former U.S. President Donald Trump is facing multiple legal cases as he seeks the Republican nomination in the 2024 presidential election. The cases include a civil lawsuit brought by the New York Attorney General accusing Trump of fraudulently inflating his net worth, a criminal investigation in Georgia into his efforts to overturn the 2020 election results, charges related to his role in the January 6 Capitol attack, charges of unlawfully retaining classified documents after leaving office, a criminal case related to hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, and civil lawsuits related to allegations of sexual abuse and defamation. Trump has pleaded not guilty to all charges and denies any wrongdoing. Biden and UAW's Shawn Fain forge an uneasy alliance amid labor turmoil. Washington Post. The UAW strike, which began in late August, has become emblematic of a broader war between the rich and the poor, with UAW President Shawn Fain casting the strike as a fight against corporate greed. The strike is also indicative of wider labor unrest in the U.S., with more than 75,000 health workers at Kaiser Permanente and Las Vegas hospitality workers also set to strike. Companies such as Starbucks and Amazon are also facing worker agitation. The strike is significant as the auto industry contributes about 3% of the nation's GDP and involves an important section of the electorate. EU ministers convene in Ukraine to show support after US-Slovakia wobbles. Reuters. EU foreign ministers held their first-ever meeting outside of the bloc in Ukraine on Monday. The meeting was seen as a show of support for Ukraine, after a pro-Russian candidate won an election in Slovakia, and the U.S. Congress omitted funding for Ukraine from a spending bill. Ukraine's foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, said that he was proud to host the meeting, and that Ukraine was confident of U.S. backing, despite the funding omission. Pro-Russian former Prime Minister Robert Fico won the most votes in the Slovakian election, and will get the first chance to form a government. Republican blockade of Ukraine aid and Slovakia's election play into Putin's hands. CNN. Republicans in the U.S. are increasingly opposing funding for Ukraine in its fight against Russia, which could have serious consequences for the country's ability to sustain its resistance. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy did not include a $6 billion request for aid in a stopgap bill to avoid a government shutdown, leaving President Joe Biden to demand swift action to fulfill Ukraine's needs. Meanwhile, former pro-Russia Prime Minister Robert Fico's Populist Party won parliamentary elections in neighboring Slovakia, which could result in a shift in policy against Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine is precarious, with arms and aid increasingly being dragged into the bitter politics of national elections in the West. This weakens resolve among Western leaders and legislatures to arm Ukraine, giving Russian President Vladimir Putin an incentive to extend the conflict in the hope that Western publics will tire of the fight. The NATO summit this year showed that there is no prospect of Ukraine joining the alliance soon, and even before the Slovakian election, getting all alliance members to back its eventual membership was already a struggle. Crypto goes on trial, as Sam Bankman-Fried faces his reckoning. New York Times. Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder of the failed FTX digital currency exchange, is set to stand trial on October 25 on charges of fraud and money laundering. The trial is expected to last 6 weeks, during which time the culture of scams and risk-taking at FTX will be scrutinized. Bankman-Fried is accused of orchestrating a fraud that siphoned billions of dollars from customers to finance political contributions, luxury real estate purchases, and venture capital investments. However, Bankman-Fried's defense team has faced setbacks in the run-up to the trial, including difficulties in accessing documents from jail. 3 high-ranking executives have pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against Bankman-Fried. America's step back on Ukraine aid puts Europe in a bind. Wall Street Journal. The U.S. has sent shockwaves across Europe with its decision to exclude aid for Ukraine from a funding measure, resulting in European leaders questioning whether they can fill the gap and provide Western support for Ukraine. While European unity on Ukraine has been strong so far, the continent's ability to increase military and economic support to compensate for the reduction in U.S. assistance is severely limited. The EU has already pledged $80.3 billion in support for Ukraine, while the US has committed $74 billion. However, the EU's defense industry is weak, so its ability to supply Ukraine with the munitions it needs is limited. European officials have acknowledged that the region also faces a political test to maintain support for Ukraine amid economic stagnation, high inflation, and budget constraints. Furthermore, U.S. support has galvanized European governments to shoulder more of the financial burden, so a step back by the U.S. would be significant. Ukraine latest: Russian shelling of Kherson kills 1, injures children. Nikkei Asia. Russian forces launched 71 attacks in the past 24 hours in Ukraine's southern region of Kherson, killing at least 1 person and injuring 6, including 2 children, according to the regional governor. The attacks targeted residential districts, as well as shops and medical infrastructure. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has vowed that nothing will weaken his country's fight against Russia, following the passing of a U.S. funding bill that omits aid to Ukraine. Slovakia's pro-Russian election winner Robert Fico is set to enter coalition talks towards a government that is likely to oppose the EU's military aid for Ukraine. Could the U.S.'s war fatigue sound the death knell for Ukraine's counterattack? ABC. The U.S. government has passed a stopgap funding bill to avoid a shutdown, but crucial aid for Ukraine has been excluded. The snub could have a negative impact on Ukraine's war effort. Some Republicans have argued that the Biden administration should divert Ukraine funding to border security and other domestic priorities. President Biden has said Republicans will provide aid support through a separate vote. The planned Senate package would have provided $6 billion to Ukraine, but the snub could mean a delay in the funding and a boost to opponents of Ukraine support. McCarthy faces a pivotal moment. CNN. The recent showdown in the U.S. House of Representatives, which narrowly averted a government shutdown, highlights the dysfunction and chaos in American politics. The Republican House majority is inoperable due to hardline members who are unwilling to compromise, leaving Speaker Kevin McCarthy with a weak position and unable to secure the necessary votes to pass bills. McCarthy's leadership is undermined by spending hawks and ultra-conservative members from pro-Trump districts who prioritize causing trouble over effective governance. The political realities and divisions in Washington make it unlikely that this chaos will ease before the 2024 election. McCarthy's battle to keep his job as Speaker has also presented a dilemma for Democrats, who may have to vote in support of McCarthy to prevent more radical alternatives. Some Democrats may see an opportunity to wring concessions from McCarthy in exchange for their support. However, this could be politically risky for Democrats in progressive districts, who may face backlash from their core supporters. The possibility of strong and cohesive governance in the U.S. seems increasingly remote, with the Trump era of republicanism characterized by chaos and disruption. Why multilateralism still matters. Foreign affairs. The United States and China are vying for leadership of the Global South, a group of developing countries that hold significant influence in international affairs. Both countries are seeking to win over these countries by promoting new approaches to multilateralism and development partnerships. The U.S. is attempting to regain influence by expanding the UN Security Council and increasing financing for the World Bank, while China has been providing infrastructure to developing countries through its Belt and Road Initiative. However, these efforts may be too little and too late, as some developing countries are already seeking their own leadership role. Other countries, such as India and Brazil, are also attempting to lead the Global South. India, in particular, has been pursuing an increasingly assertive role on the international stage, and has used its leadership of the G20 to burnish its credentials as a leader of developing countries. However, domestic political pressures and slow economic growth in these countries may hinder their prospects of winning over the Global South. The West's efforts to win over the Global South have been hampered by domestic politics, summit fatigue, and a perceived lack of leadership on issues such as infrastructure financing and vaccine provision. While the US and Europe have launched initiatives to counter China's influence, these efforts have made slow progress and may not be enough to win over developing countries. Ultimately, a sustained effort to reform existing multilateral institutions and provide the necessary financial resources will be necessary to build effective multilateralism. What a Saudi-Israeli deal could mean for the Palestinians. Foreign Affairs. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet members are seeking the de facto annexation of the West Bank, which could have severe consequences for Israel's democracy and Middle East stability. Members of Netanyahu's coalition, including Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, aim to create a Jewish state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea by settling much of the West Bank and suppressing Palestinian national aspirations. This plan would render Palestinians as second-class non-citizens and fuel criticism that Israel is an apartheid state. To counter this dangerous plan, U.S. President Joe Biden and Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman should condition their potential normalization of relations with Israel on the abandonment of annexation ambitions in the West Bank. They should demand the transfer of Israeli-controlled land in the West Bank to the Palestinian Authority, freeze settlement expansion, and illegal outposts. These commitments would halt the extremist push for annexation. Failure to address this issue would inadvertently provide a green light for the extremist plan to proceed. Bezalel Smotrich, leader of the Religious Zionist Party and finance minister, is a staunch supporter of settler movements and has openly advocated for the annexation of the West Bank. He is now in a position of power to enact his vision, and the Israeli government has already taken steps to expand settlements and legalize illegal outposts. The US and Saudi Arabia have the opportunity to prevent the realization of Smotrich's plan by placing conditions on their normalization deal with Israel. If Netanyahu chooses normalization with Saudi Arabia over his partnership with Smotrich, it would benefit the region as a whole. However, if Netanyahu prioritizes Smotrich's agenda, Israel will be the ultimate loser. The Trump-highest congressman, taking aim at U.S. House Speaker McCarthy. South China Morning Post. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz has threatened to file a motion to oust House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, accusing the party leader of falling short of conservative immigration policies and government spending cuts. Gaetz, an ally of former President Donald Trump, has been agitating for McCarthy's removal, leading to tension within the Republican Party. Gaetz has faced federal and House probes into sex trafficking allegations, which he denies, but has denied reports that he is considering a run for Florida governor. The motion to oust McCarthy would require support from Democrats due to the slim Republican majority in the House. Wall Street bankers hope for deal-making rebound after boom and bust. Financial Times. Wall Street bankers are hoping for a rebound in deal-making activity to boost bonuses and morale after a year of decline, but they fear a return to the industry's 2021 peak is a long way off. Investment banking activity plummeted in 2022 when central banks began raising interest rates. While recent deals are feeding optimism for a turning point in 2024, executives do not expect a return to the extreme boom and bust cycle of the past 4 years. The last time the industry faced a similar whipsaw in activity was during the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis. Hey there, it's me, Dr. Six, your trusty observer from the 6 Degrees world. I hope you're ready for another round of news updates, because I've got some interesting stories to share with you today. First up, the U.S. Supreme Court has refused to hear an appeal from 2 lawyers who were sanctioned for their involvement in a lawsuit challenging the result of the 2020 U.S. presidential election. It seems the court has had enough of the woeful suits that have been brought forward in support of Donald Trump. I guess you could say they've been trumped. In other news, Republican candidates for governor in Kentucky and Mississippi are using President Joe Biden as a key part of their campaigns, even though he's not on the ballot. It's like they're playing a game of Where's Biden and trying to make him the face of their opponents. Talk about a mental shortcut. Meanwhile, Ukraine is seeking to reassure the U.S. that its support in its conflict with Russia has not faltered, despite doubts about fresh funding. It seems there's some uncertainty about the future of U.S. backing for Ukraine, but Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is confident that discussions with Republicans and Democrats will ensure continued support. Let's hope they can work it out because Ukraine needs all the help it can get. Now, here's some good news from Scotland. The Scottish Child Payment, a weekly cash payment of £25 for each child under 16 years old, has been praised for reducing child poverty rates, and could be a model for combating poverty globally. It's amazing what a little extra cash can do to lift children out of poverty. Maybe we should all take a page out of Scotland's book. Moving on to Russia, the Kremlin sees the U.S. Congress's decision to pass a funding bill that excluded aid for Ukraine as a temporary setback. They believe that war fatigue in the West will grow and lead to a split in opinion. It's like they're playing a game of wait and see with the Western countries. But let's hope that fatigue doesn't lead to a lack of support for Ukraine. In the world of oil, American shale drillers have said they will not increase production even if oil prices reach $100 a barrel. They claim the Biden administration is waging a war on fossil fuels and they need capital discipline. It seems they're not willing to budge, even with the rising oil prices. Well, I guess they're sticking to their guns, or should I say, their drills. In a surprising twist, Hunter Biden, son of President Joe Biden, may benefit from a recent Supreme Court ruling that expanded gun rights when he contests his indictment on firearms-related charges. The ruling established a new standard for judging the legality of gun restrictions, and Biden's defense attorney may argue that the federal law banning illegal drug users from owning guns violates his Second Amendment rights. Who would have thought a Supreme Court ruling could come to the aid of a Biden? Now, let's talk about the legal troubles of former President Donald Trump. It seems he's facing multiple legal cases as he seeks the Republican nomination in the 2024 presidential election. From fraud allegations to charges related to the Capitol attack, Trump is certainly keeping the courts busy. But he's pleaded not guilty to all charges and denies any wrongdoing. I guess we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. In the world of labor, the UAW strike has become emblematic of a broader war between the rich and the poor. UAW President Shawn Fain is casting the strike as a fight against corporate greed, and it seems more workers across different industries are joining in. It's like a domino effect of labor unrest. Companies like Starbucks and Amazon are also facing worker agitation. Looks like the workers are ready to fight for their rights, and they're not backing down. On the international stage, EU foreign ministers held a meeting in Ukraine to show support after the US and Slovakia wobbled. It's like they're saying, "We've got your back, Ukraine." And Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is confident of US backing, despite the funding omission. It's good to see countries coming together to support each other in times of need. Now, let's talk about the world of cryptocurrencies. Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder of the failed FTX digital currency exchange, is set to stand trial on charges of fraud and money laundering. The trial is expected to reveal the culture of scams and risk-taking at FTX. It's like a real-life episode of Crypto Goes on Trial. I wonder if there will be any plot twists or surprise witnesses. Speaking of trials, the US's decision to exclude aid for Ukraine from a funding measure has put Europe in a bind. European leaders are questioning whether they can fill the gap and provide Western support for Ukraine. The EU has already pledged support, but its ability to provide military aid is limited. It's like a game of juggling resources and political constraints. Let's hope they can find a way to support Ukraine in its time of need. In the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Russian forces have launched attacks in Ukraine's southern region, causing casualties and destruction. It's a reminder that the conflict is far from over and innocent lives are being affected. Let's hope for a peaceful resolution and an end to the violence. Now, let's shift gears and talk about some international relations. The US and China are vying for leadership of the Global South, and both countries are promoting new approaches to multilateralism and development partnerships. It's like a game of who can win over the most countries. But it seems some developing countries are also seeking their own leadership role, so it's not just a battle between the US and China. It's like a multilateralism race with multiple contenders. In the Middle East, Israel's plan to de facto annex the West Bank is causing concern for its democracy and Middle East stability. The plan could render Palestinians as second-class non-citizens and fuel criticism that Israel is an apartheid state. To counter this, the US and Saudi Arabia should condition their potential normalization of relations with Israel on the abandonment of annexation ambitions. It's like a game of diplomatic chess, with the future of the region at stake. Now, let's talk politics. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz is threatening to file a motion to oust House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, accusing him of falling short of conservative policies. It's like a power struggle within the Republican Party. Gaetz has faced his own legal troubles but denies reports of running for Florida governor. The motion to oust McCarthy would require support from Democrats, so it's like a political chess game with unexpected alliances. And finally, Wall Street bankers are hoping for a rebound in deal-making activity after a year of decline. They're eager to boost bonuses and morale, but they know a return to the extreme boom and bust cycle of the past is unlikely. It's like they're managing their expectations, but still hoping for a big win. Let's see if they can strike some lucrative deals and bring back the glory days of Wall Street. Well, folks, that's all the news I have for you today. It's been quite a ride, hasn't it? From legal troubles to labor unrest and international conflicts to cryptocurrency trials, there's never a dull moment in the world. But remember, these are just snippets of the bigger picture. So stay curious, stay informed, and keep questioning the world around you. And now, it's your turn. What do you think about these news stories? Do you have any burning questions or insightful comments? I'm all ears. Let's keep the conversation going, because together, we can make sense of this crazy world. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.